Oh, hello, good evening, welcome. This is Ghana Tonight. We're live from Sabata Desawe Kanda, also live on TV3 Ghana on Facebook, DSTV channel 279. We're all across the world on 3news.com. I am Alfred Okanse. Tonight, defeated New Patriotic Party flag bearer Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia blames the party's poor showing and his historic defeat in the presidential election on the media. We'll tell you exactly why he says so. Stay with us here on Ghana Tonight. Also, Electoral Commission turns to President Akufo-Addo and President-elect John Dramani Mahama for help to carry out a recollation exercise in some 9 disputed constituencies. But the legality of that exercise has come under scrutiny. Stay with us. We have a conversation on that on Ghana Tonight also. Away from matters of elections and the court hands Juvenile at the center of the East Legon fatal accident 6 months detention, much to the dissatisfaction of the families and indeed the members general public who have been reacting to this, who lost relatives in the accident. Time to embark on a reform of juvenile justice. We'll look at the law. Stay with us as always. You're an integral part of the conversation. Let's hear from you. The hashtag we're using is Ghana Tonight on Facebook and on X. Let's get talking. Let's settle for Ghana Briefs.
Finance Minister Dr. Ming Adam has once again absented himself from Parliament, leaving the budget for the first quarter of 2025 in limbo. This is the 4th consecutive time the minister has absented himself and failed to lay the expenditure in advance appropriation.
Honourable members, clearly we have no option than to wait on the Minister for Finance, because this is not just an ordinary paper. It's a paper coming under Article 179, and the authority is vested in the President of the Republic. And so we will wait until tomorrow. And if that is done tomorrow, we may have to set extra hours.
The Electoral Commission has appealed to President Akufo-Addo and President-elect John Mahama to help provide security for its officials to allow recollation of outstanding constituency results. According to the chairperson, Jean Mensah, threats, intimidation and unlawful takeovers by party supporters have grounded efforts to complete processes for some 9 outstanding constituencies.
In the view of the Commission, upholding such unlawful collations and declarations will set a bad precedent for our country and set us back to the dark days. We therefore use this occasion to humbly call on the President of Ghana, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, as well as our President-elect, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, to intervene in this matter so as to ensure that the Commission is provided with the necessary security and protection to carry out its functions.
A member of the legal team for NDC, Evan Samankwa, says the only solution for the Ahafo-Ano North and Ahafo-Ano Southwest parliamentary election dispute is to go for a rerun, since the Electoral Commission has confirmed it does not have pink sheets. The party, he said, will, however, not entertain any form of recollation of the Obuasi East parliamentary results, as its parliamentary candidate was duly declared winner by the returning officer.
Tepa. The EC even could not declare the presidential elections. And it was part of the constituencies that was not declared. And today, the EC is saying that they don't have the pink sheets of Tepa because they were vandalized by thugs. So if you don't have any pink sheet, all that we are calling for is a rerun of that elections. It's as simple as that. So that when you go for a rerun and you think you won, it will repeat itself. Nothing will change.
the family of victims of the East Legon accident, which led to the death of two 12-year-old girls, are calling for amendments of the Juvenile Justice Act to improve stiffer punishments to minors engaged in heinous crimes. The family and juvenile court sentenced 16-year-old son of leader of Alive Chapel International, Bishop Salifa Mwako, to 6 months after he pleaded guilty to charges including manslaughter.
Juvenile system say yeah let's say a children shop film 6 months and yes 7 I said no
What am I going to say? What do I have to say? The court has given its ruling. What can I do? I pray it will get to a time where the law can be amended, because you can't kill 2 people through reckless driving and get this sentence. But that is the law.
Through reckless driving.
The Center for Environmental Management and Sustainable Energy has urged the incoming government to refrain from signing any new power purchase agreements for the next 3 years. Speaking to 3 Business, Executive Director of the Center, Benjamin Insia, stated that Ghana's current power challenges do not stem from inadequate installed generation capacity. Instead, he suggests that the country needs to optimize its existing energy infrastructure.
Our concern and also advice to the incoming government is to suspend or do not engage in any power purchase agreement between 2025 and 2028. Because if you look at our growth projection in terms of demand in the power sector, we grow by between 7 to 10%. And looking at a sector that has an installed capacity of about 6,000 megawatts and a peak demand of about 3,700, which is projected to be around 4,000 megawatt by close of year.
Oh, it's more news on 3news.com. Make some time and visit 3news.com. This is Ghana Tonight. Coming up right now, the defeated New Patriotic Party flag bearer, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, blames the party's poor showing in the presidential and parliamentary election partly on the media. Now, that's a conversation that's generated a number of reactions from you, members of the general public, on exactly why the party and indeed the flag bearer will resort to this particular position. And in fact, even before we get into exactly what Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia said when he met the party's communicators at his residence after this defeat in this 2024 election, a pro-NPP group, that's the Concerned Patriots for Change, they are calling for a comprehensive and independent investigation into the cause of the party's defeat in the 2024 election, that is for the presidential. And for Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, seems to have figured it all out as to the cause of the party's defeat. According to him, the party faced a significant communication challenge in the build-up to elections due to what he says is the NDC's dominance in key traditional media outlets. Here's exactly what he told the party communicators, and we're going to hear from the pro-NPP group right now. But this is what Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia said when he met the party's communicators at his residence. Quote, "We dominated the NDC in that's on the social media or in social media advertisement. I mean, by far, very, very clearly, we were working against their ownership of support from key media houses." You know, and he says, isn't it, you know? He continues, "That put us at a disadvantage in many ways in terms of the communication field, because we had a lot of these key media houses who were not on our side. You fought very hard at the time. You had the opportunity." It goes on and on. You know, so as the party, in fact, he himself, his running mate, and the party itself has indicated they are doing some introspection and reflection to find out exactly what caused their defeat. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia is pointing partly to the media for this. But this is what the pro-NPP group, Patriots for Change, say caused the defeat of the party. Take a look.
We demand answers to the following pressing concerns: management of campaign funds. Allegations abound regarding the misappropriation of campaign resources, particularly funds allocated for grassroots mobilization under the Go TV initiative, sidelining of experienced stakeholders. Key party stewards who could have provided invaluable counsel and leadership were marginalized during critical moments. Abuse of power, the neglect of duties, leadership exhibited incompetence, inexperience, and blatant disregard for the concerns of the rank and file. Unity remains the backbone of the MPP. Unfortunately, the dismissal of key members, including the likes of Honorable Alan Kojo Chamantin, Chairman Paul Afoko, Honorable Boniface Sadiq, Honorable Yabuamia Samoa, Honorable Into, have fragmented our party and weakened its collective strength. We believe in this time to recall all suspended and dismissed members to foster reconciliation and inclusivity. If the NDC can integrate former defectors like Kusitano into their team, the MPP must rise above grudges and bring our members back into the fold.
So that's the MPP group's recommendation there, that the party should be looking at in their introspection that they are doing. But really, let's bring in Professor Kobe Mensah. He's a political marketing strategist, also is senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Thank you very much, Professor Kobe Mensah, for joining us here on Ghana Tonight. So you've heard Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia diagnosing why he lost with this historic margin that we're seeing in the presidential election. He says the party faced a communication challenge, partly because key media outlets, in his words, are owned by NDC people, and that impacted negatively on the party's communication. I want to find out how this strikes you.
Well, I think that the vice president, with all due respect, probably had not done a proper assessment, and perhaps is in denial about how they lost the election. Obviously, from a political communication perspective, you would agree with me that media houses or the media actually serves an intermediary role between the voters and the political entities or the political actors. Clearly, at some point, the media either does or it's either active or passive, depending on the situations. Obviously, in the literature, some people would argue for a passive media, others talk about an active media. Whatever the position is, clearly the media is there to serve two people, especially the voters, and then, of course, to also serve the political parties. Now, you would have media, in most cases, switching allegiances, especially when it comes to state media. When a certain government has become unpopular or it's become tyrannic, that's when perhaps the media, especially state media, if they have the kind of merit and they have the kind of strength, could actually stand against, for example, a tyrannic government on behalf of the people. But it doesn't happen in democracy. I mean, most of the time in democracies, the media control, as we call it in political communication, is in three forms. One, ownership. Two, obviously editorial influence, and then of course, three, commercialization. Here we're talking about ad spend. We're talking about eyeballs in terms of size of market. These are mostly the kind of controls that we could actually talk about with political parties and media. Now, if you take the first one, the ownership, usually it's a public domain, it's of public information. I mean, no one in Ghana would say that they have actually observed the media and ownership is in the hands of the NDC. I mean, it would be laughable, especially when you talk about major players in the media industry. The private ones are very much commercial, are very much owned by business people. Those that are used for political purposes, we know that majority of them the major players are NPP owners, for example. And then, of course, when it comes to state media or the public ones, obviously, most of the time, they are at the beck and call of the political system or the state, as we call it. And so for someone to talk about opposition party having control of the media from the idea of ownership perspective, it sounds a little bit strange to me. The next one, let's talk about editorial control or editorial influence. Clearly, it stems from ownership, all right? And so majority of times, you're going to have ownership or the owners actually calling the shots, unless, of course, you have very much independent editorial, team or the lead of the media, the editorial lead may be very much independent. And even then, although it's not public, you can see that from the perspective of reporting. And in this case, the major news outlets or the major networks, you could see a very independent, commercially oriented media houses who are only driven by how much do you have in terms of your spend in adverts. And then, of course, the popularity of the shows, to the audiences, for example. And so you're not going to have a private media just doing your bidding because you're a political party. Yeah. It is because they have to satisfy what the public wants. Through that, they would make, their monies, because the more eyeballs they get, the more advertising revenue they can drive. Right. And so I don't think that any political party would be able to sort of influence a certain commercial media house or a private media house to the extent that it would be to the detriment of their viewership, etc.
I see, but if you consider, and I'm going to have you come in quickly, if you consider the audience that he was talking to as well, that's the party's communicators. A number of them, even before Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia met them yesterday, had been putting out on social media, something of a sort. So it appears to be reflecting what they're thinking. But is that going to help their introspection? I mean, the MPP's introspection and reflection as to why they lost in any way, if they are blaming the media for their defeat and nothing else apart from that?
Of course, they do that. They don't have a mind of their own. I mean, they were at the forefront of the activity, the very activity that the vice president is actually assessing. All right. How did they see it? Did they actually see a certain, dominance as a result of perhaps NDC hijacking the media space? Or they saw a natural growth of opposition against the government? Perhaps they should be able to be their own persons and then be able to speak and tell the vice president that perhaps your assessment is incorrect, because obviously the hierarchy could actually mean something else. Those who were given the resources perhaps might have actually sat on the resources and not, sort of release them to the front line in order that they could actually be dominant, for example. And so if they could go and sit on TV and radio and then, of course, sort of trumpet exactly what the vice president is saying, then they literally are robots, for example, because they saw it, very, very plain, on the front line. I think that the vice president is trying to have some excuses. He's trying to be very dogmatic. He doesn't want to be very practical, and he doesn't want to be, very, truthful, so to speak. If that's the case, of course, he's actually managing his own communication, managing his own message. But of course, the followers of the MPP, I am not sure that they would buy exactly what the vice president says, especially if they are honest to themselves about what transpired in this election. They certainly would take, with a pinch of salt, what the vice president is actually.
I say, Professor Mensah, quickly before I let you go, he mentions social media and the fact that the MPP really dominated social media much more than the NDC. And in fact, he says they overtook the NDC when it comes to their social media dominance. You were quite active on social media in terms of the engagement, not just the posting by the parties. From your own assessment, was that dominance reflective in the reality of the situation before the elections? And if it was, how did that impact as well on the final outcome?
Who would say that NPP didn't spend more than NDC? It was clear. I mean, you could argue that they outspent NDC even 3-1. And so from that perspective, I doubt whether the vice president assertion could actually be taken. Now, let's go back to social media, all right, where he claims that they controlled or they dominated. Of course, from the supply perspective, i.e., from their own perspective, they outspent the NDC. They had a lot of, people that they used bots, etc. But they couldn't dominate NDC because we all were part of the social media campaign, in this election, because majority of ordinary people were driving the narrative perhaps against the NPP. I wouldn't say that for NDC because it was always about a narrative against the NPP, but perhaps for the benefits of NDC. And so perhaps from a spend perspective, probably they might have actually issued big budgets as government would do. They had the resources, i.e. the human, the manpower, the number of people that they deployed on the social media space. They probably had used bots. And of course, you saw what they did. They did a personalization kind of messaging that they sent to people with a text blast, etc. Perhaps from that perspective, yes. But from the receiving end, I don't think they were able to dominate the NDC because ordinary people took the campaign to the MPP and they swarmed the MPP. In fact, at some point, the MPP bots and the MPP, social media army couldn't be found on Twitter. And there was a joke that perhaps all of them had gone to Facebook because they couldn't match the wrath, the anger of the people on Twitter.
Right. And Prof, appreciate you for this. And look, this conversation is going on across all social media platforms. And Prof. Sakobi Mensah, thank you very much for your expert analysis on this particular issue. Political marketing strategist, senior lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. But talk about social media, because Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia also pointed out that the NPP dominated there. We decided to ask the same question of you, the Ghanaian people on social media, and the responses that we got. So what caused Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia's historic defeat? He points partly to the media and ownership. So we put it there. State of the economy, number one. Disappointed NPP members, number two. And then the media publications, ownership. This is the verdict of the people on social media. So this is still on our X page, by the way. So if you go on TV3 Ghana on X, you'll see this. 4,066 people took part in this poll as of the last 5 minutes. And 88% of the over 4,000 people who took part in this poll say the state of the economy caused Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia's defeat. 10% of you say some disappointed NPP members also contributed to his defeat. And 2% say media. Now, we put it also on our 3 News GH page. Same verdict. 83% of you say state of the economy. The record of the presidency, 9%. Media publication, 2%. And disappointed NPP members, 6%. If you want some verification of this, if you go on 3 News GH, follow that page, you'll see this poll running. And also on our WhatsApp channel, the 3 News TV3 WhatsApp channel, we put the same question there. And we had over 1,000 of you participating in this. We asked the question, what caused Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia's historic defeat? State of the economy and presidency's record. 1,100 of you say it is the state of the economy and the record of President Kufuor and Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. Second, 38 of you say media publications, and 110 of you say disappointed NPP members. So across all the social media and the contributions, all of you put the main issue that caused Dr. Mahmoud Bamia's defeat to the state of the economy and the presidency's record. Well, they are going through the process of introspection themselves as a party and reflecting on the days gone by. So we'll see how the outcome will be. But this is your Election Command Center. Coming up next, the Electoral Commission turns to President Akufo-Addo and President-elect John Mahama for help to carry out a recollation exercise in some 9 disputed constituencies. But the legality of this exercise, in fact, is being questioned, and indeed that's come under intense scrutiny. First, let's hear from Jen Adoko-Mensah, the chair of the Electoral Commission. Earlier today, the fate of at least 9 constituencies still remain unknown, according to the EC. These include constituencies where the declarations have been held as invalid by the Electoral Commission, and constituencies where collation or recollation, which is illegal according to the lawyers, and declaration is yet to be done. The EC is, however, facing a significant challenge and has been courting the support of President Akufo-Addo and President-elect John Mahama. This is the chairperson of the EC addressing the media earlier today.
We therefore use this occasion to humbly call on the President of Ghana, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, as well as our President-elect, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, to intervene in this matter so as to ensure that the Commission is provided with the necessary security and protection to carry out its functions. We also call on the National Election Security Task Force to come together to put in place arrangements to ensure that our staff and our processes are protected and secured in a way that will ensure that the true outcomes of our processes reflect the will of the people as expressed on the pink sheets.
The following pressing.
That's the chair of the Electoral Commission there. She also makes mention of how some of the Commission's staff were threatened and in the presence of the Ghana Police Service personnel at some of these collation centers to declare some persons as MPs elect on the ticket of the NDC. Take a look.
The Commission has tried to complete the collation in some of these constituencies. We have been faced with resistance, threats, intimidation, and the destruction of our properties. Our staff have been threatened, and the established collation processes, as guided by law, have been disrupted, and winners have been declared without due processes governing collation being followed. In a number of instances, our staff have been threatened with death and forced to declare outcomes without adhering to the processes governing collation. It is instructive to note that the Electoral Commission has held discussions with the Ghana Police Service and has requested protection at all centers at which the collation was supposed to have continued. Unfortunately, as we have witnessed on TV, images have emerged showing our staff being threatened and made to declare results stemming from incomplete collation processes. Unfortunately, this has been in the presence of the police. Though the police have been present at all the collation centers, the supporters of political parties have managed to gain access to the collation centers and have disrupted the collation process.
Well, so that's the chair of the Electoral Commission there at the press conference earlier today. Now, just going to run you through quickly the constituencies in dispute, according to the Electoral Commission, some of which declarations were actually made by the EC's own returning officers, and in some cases, some officers of the Electoral Commission declaring the NDC MPs, in fact, NDC candidates as MPs elect. But the Electoral Commission says they do not recognize those declarations done by their own officers because it did not follow due process. It's illegal. And so they're going to do recollation. These are the, let's take a look at this, the constituencies. First off, in Swam there hasn't been any declaration. That's Frankanodo Breast constituency. That's still outstanding. Ahavuano Southwest, that's also outstanding. It's in the Ashanti region. Ahavuano North, also in the Ashanti region. No declarations made as yet. And Obuasi East, for Obuasi East, the NDC candidate in the Obuasi East constituency was declared as the MP elect for the Obuasi East constituency. Once Samuel Abuaji was the NDC candidate there. Now we have that declaration, right? And I'm going to play it for you. This was done, that declaration of Samuel was done by the EC returning officer for the constituency. Take a look.
Samuel Abuaji had 18,558. Ajay also free had 404. I therefore declare Samuel Abuaji as the parliamentary candidate elect for Obuasi.
Well, so that's what happened in Obuasi East. Well, but the Electoral Commission says that this declaration did not follow due process, and so it's illegal. The next constituency is no different. Let's take a look at the list. We'll also go straight to the Tema Central constituency, where Ebi Bright was declared. In fact, let's look at Okaikwe Central. Okaikwe Central is where Baba Sadiq was declared as MP-elect on the ticket of the NDC. That video as well, we have that declaration by the AC officer. This was done at the Electoral Commission's Greater Accra Regional Office. Take a look.
Okaikwe Central constituency. Patrick Yabuama had 14,949. Abu Baba Abdullah Sadiq had 15,383. Total valid votes is 30,332. Rejected ballot is 130. Total vote cast 30,462. So from this election, this represents 78% of the election held at Okaikwe Central. So from this result, Baba Sadiq has been elected Member of Parliament for Okaikwe Central. Thank you. 2024.
My colleague Dennis Baberi Wadam is going to be joining me a bit. We'll run through some legal references in CI 127. But also for Ablekuma North, there was a declaration of a Rabana Orbin by the EC officer, returning officer, as the MP elect, same as Tema Central. Ebi Bright was declared by, in this case, the Tema West returning officer because of all the issues that happened there. And then also for Dom Kwabinya constituency, Faustina Akurugu was declared by the returning officer for the Dom Kwabinya constituency, the EC returning officer, as the MP elect. The Electoral Commission says they don't recognize that one as well. This is what happened in Dom Kwabinya. Take a look. We'll recall that shortly, but thankfully, joining us, that's Dr. Rashid Tanko Computer, is the Deputy Director of IT and Elections for the NDC. And we'll also hear from the Deputy General Secretary of the MPP. I spoke to him earlier. But Dr. Rashid Tanko, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Let me say good evening to your cherished viewers.
So that's the verdict of the Electoral Commission on the constituencies that, even though declarations have been made by the officers declaring that your candidates are MP select, they say they didn't follow due process. At some point, some of them had to declare under duress. Some of them were threatened by some supporters of yours to declare those candidates as MPs elect. So they don't recognize it. It's illegal.
Alfred, we are not in the jungle. We operate under laws. We operate under the 1992 Constitution and then the CI that govern elections in Ghana. I'm holding the CI here, 127. The constitutional instrument that governs. This constitutional instrument came into force on the 6th August 2020, and it was signed by Madam Jean Mensa. So they cannot pretend not to understand what is in the CI, because it was under her hand that the CI was passed. Now, in this CI, the one who is responsible for parliamentary election is the returning officer. The CI gave them that power. Madam Jean Mensa is responsible for presidential election. She has no business in this CI for parliamentary election. In fact, her only duty mentioned under parliamentary election is Regulation 43. If you look at Regulation 43, 2A and B, that is where she's mentioned under parliamentary. That is when the returning officer return the writ by filling the Form 1B to the commission. The commission, listen to what 2A says. 43.2. The commission shall, on receipt of the endorsed writ, A, publish in the Gazette a notice stating the name of the person elected and the total number of votes cast for each candidate, and inform the clerk to Parliament soon after that of the name of the candidate elected. That is the duty of the Electoral Commission.
Some NDC, in fact, the NPP folks say, to the extent that the Electoral Commission has not gazetted these declarations, they can still challenge it and render it as illegal.
What we are saying is that you can challenge that through the court of competent jurisdiction. You cannot mention about recollation here. The CI has not mentioned anything about recollation.
So the recollation has no reference in law?
It has no reference in law. It has no reference. The declaration as who has become a parliamentary candidate elect rests under Regulation 43A up to H. And so if a returning officer satisfies himself with these regulations, he can go ahead and declare. And then so when he declares, he sends the writ to the commission. The commission has no power to sit down and say, we are reassessing your declaration, whether it followed due process or not. They don't have that power.
Well, their verdict is that some of their officers did these declarations under duress or without adherence to proper collation processes as enshrined in law.
Alfred, if you look at Article 99(1) of the 1992 Constitution, that power they are talking of rests in the hands of the High Court. It is a High Court that can determine whether a declaration made by a returning officer was valid or not.
Not
or follow a due process. Not the Electoral Commission. They don't have that power. They have constituted themselves into judges. I don't know where they got those powers from. You remember in 2020, when they vandalized Techima SAF, in the midst of the vandalism, they were declaring results. People were lying down in pool of blood while declaration was going on. We challenged that and told them that, look, this declaration was illegal because proper collation was not done. So they should do recollation. Madam Jean Mensa wrote back, I can read that part for you, to us, and indicated that in terms of parliamentary election, that when declarations are made, they cannot do recollation again. But in the process of collating, you can ask for recollation before declaration. But if you don't ask for recollation and declaration so made, you cannot come back and ask for the recollation. That was her response to us.
For the Techima
in 2020. And she was saying that because of this regulation 43A to H.
But so hold on a bit for me. Let's look at the regulation 43 that you talk about. Dennis Paberi Wadam is here. Dennis, let's get into it. What does it say?
Well, so regulation 43 of CI 127, it talks about the processes that need to be adhered to in a declaration and publication of parliamentary election results. So it walks you through a procedure, and the one, regulation 43.1, says that immediately after the results of the poll for all the polling stations in the constituency of the returning officer have been given to the returning officer shall, in the presence of the candidates or the representatives of the candidates, or not more than 2 counting agents appointed by each candidate. A, assemble the results from the polling stations without recounting.
So without recounting?
Without recounting the ballots in the ballot boxes, except where there is a challenge by a candidate or a counting agent in respect of a specific ballot box. So let's put on record that even the issue of recounting itself is an exception to the law, because the law by its default say that there should not be recounting except where there's a challenge. So, and this challenge must come from specific people. What it means is, again, is that the EC sole motu cannot recount.
It cannot recollect, or we can replace the recounting to recollect. Okay.
So counting itself, yes, count, no recounting, except where there's a challenge from agents or the candidates or their representatives. It continues. Now, after that is done, fill the parliamentary election results summary sheet as set out in Form 1D of the schedule. C, give public notice of the total number of votes cast for each candidate. D, publicly declare as elected in the parliamentary election the candidate who had the highest votes.
And those are the videos we've been seeing.
Now the process continues. After this, there's a request for the candidates or the representatives and counting agents of the agent together with the returning officers to sign a certain document, and it continues. The point has to be made. It goes all the way to a point where there's an endorsement of the rate specified in Form 1B of the schedule, the name of the person elected. Mind you, this is the person who has been declared.
Yes.
Forward to the commission, the endorsed rates and the notes of the total number of votes cast for each of the candidates. It goes on to say that now the commission shall, on receipt of this endorsed rates, publish in the Gazette a notice stating the name of the person elected and the total number of votes cast for each candidate, and then subsequently inform the clerk to Parliament soon after that of the name of the candidates elected.
I see.
So this is what Regulation 43 of CI 127 spells out by way of declaration and publication of parliamentary election results.
So there's really no room for the recollection as the Electoral Commission.
We don't find it here.
I see. So, but the commission and the commissioner they were quite clear in their words, and they've been consistent. In fact, Dr. Tanko, last week Friday, they addressed the media, and it's more like a reproduction of what they said last Friday, what we heard from the EC chair today, to the extent that these declarations were done under certain circumstances, it invalidates the results. Are you saying that regardless of the circumstance under these declarations were made, the results stand intact?
Look, it doesn't lie in their mouth to determine a situation of that nature. They don't have that power. The power to determine whether a declaration was made under duress or not lies with the High Court, not the Commission. You see, that's the mistake we are making.
Right.
Otherwise, we are descending to an abyss where we also raise issue of declaration in certain constituencies in Ashanti region and said they were made under duress. That's why we lost them. Is that what we're going to do? Because some people lost, it's becoming difficult for them to accept. And that because you see, they had only 78 seats. That's the most miserable thing they've ever seen in their life under this regime. 78 MPP. So they are just struggling to help them to show up their numbers. Otherwise, why would a returning officer make a declaration, having gone through all this procedure your presenter made here? And I read it under CI 127, Regulation 43. And I'm saying that Madam Jean Mensah wrote to us, and I will read it verbatim, that look, recollection in 2020, recollection can be done at all levels when requested before declaration. This was that before declaration of results. However, once election results have been declared, a dissatisfied party cannot request for a recollection or a recount of the results. What has changed? What has changed in Ghana? What is this?
So in the case of Obuasi East and Okaikwe Central, Tema Central, and Domingo, and then also that's the fifth one, and that's Ablekuma North.
And Ablekuma North.
Those 5, even though the EC says the declarations did not follow due process, that does not find any place.
It doesn't find a place here. And I'm saying that, see, Alfred, another mistake they are making, because when we met with our opponent, the MPP, with the IGP, they were making reference to Afarajan time. That root coalitions happened, and they were referring to Peru is something happened in 2012 and all that. And I told them, you see, you people are not learning. Those elections had CIs under Afarajan. The CI that was used for the 2004 and 2012 had provision for recollation.
But this CI
doesn't have provision for recollation. You see, you cannot use those CIs to come and justify what is going on, because every election cycle has its own CI. So this 2020 and 2024, we use one CI for it. They wanted to amend this, we prevented them. That's why they wanted to use Ghana card as they sold this thing and another thing, and we prevented them from amending it in Parliament. So we continue to use the same CI that was used in 2020. So the regulations that was used in 2020 is the same regulation we use for 2024. So there's no room for recollation whatsoever. They are involved in illegality. And I think I would take this opportunity to call on His Excellency Nana-Addo, the President, and then the incoming President, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, to call them to order.
Well, they've called on the two of them for support.
They should rather call them to order. They are involved in illegality. What they are doing is complete illegality.
They said they need protection to do.
How can they protect them to continue to do illegal things? The law is very clear about it. You know, in order not to descend into abyss, we went to court to injunct the process that their recollation they are doing was wrong. And the court is going to sit tomorrow. Why are they forcing to do it in the face of these court processes that we have?
So you dragged the Electoral Commission to court?
We dragged them to court. And yet they are still forcing to do that thing. What is their motive? What are they trying to do?
I want us to take a listen briefly to Haruna Mohammed. He is the Deputy General Secretary of the NPP. I spoke to him on Hot Edition on 3FM 92.7, 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. Take a listen.
Does the CI 127 give the Electoral Commission any power to invalidate results declared by its officers by just a press conference, or they would have to go to court to, as it were, invalidate these results that they say is illegal?
Alfred, if you address your mind to the CI 127, go and read CI 127,
Regulation 43.2.
Shall on receipt of an endorsed writ published in the Gazette a notice stating the name of the person elected and the total number of votes cast for each candidate. So much as you go and stand and declare a result that is not in conformity with the law, doesn't necessarily mean that the Electoral Commission will take whatever you do. Alfred, if you want to go by what is happening, go and check some of the constituencies. A constituency that has, let's say, 200 polling stations, you go and gather 140, 120 polling stations, do it and declare, and say that, okay, once I have declared, and the law says that if I declare, you go to court. Tomorrow, somebody will pick one polling station, declare that polling station, and declare somebody as an MP elect.
No, that's Haruna Mohammed then. He makes reference to a scenario. That's what happened in Okaikwe Central, where there are 141 polling stations, correct? The declaration was made based on 110 polling station results. 31 of them, there were issues. And why did that happen?
Alfred, this is a simple matter. You went to the collation center to collate pink sheets. That's why you bring them together. The EC has the original copy, and then we have carbon copies. Then the EC will now come and say they don't have this, but they have samples of this in pink sheets, which are altered. In fact, they are not the original ones. There's like, they have brought pink sheets to replace the original one. Ostensibly that they couldn't get them.
So the pink sheets that were brought by the EC, is not the original.
It's not the original pink sheets.
And it's not the carbon copy.
It's not the carbon copy too.
So where did they get it from?
So that is the question. That's why some of the polling station pink sheets could not be added to this thing, because clearly the returning officers also rejected those ones and said, no, these are not correct ones. We cannot add them. Because even if you look at the face of it, you get to know that somebody just manufactured them and brought them there.
So was it the same handwriting?
Different handwritings. Even the carbon copies that we have and the MPP have was different from the original. It means somebody brought some original one somewhere. Ostensibly, the person was not smart enough, because the one the NDC has and the one the MPP has collaborated each other. But the original
other ones were different. From the EC.
Was different from what MPP and NDC
had. So how will you add such a thing? It happened in Samoma Dodgery. At some of the 82 polling stations. I was there at the Tessano. When we saw that the MPP had photocopies, they didn't have carbon copies. They came with photocopies. So we asked them, where do you get photocopies? Pink sheets don't have photocopies. Ostensibly, somebody photocopies DS for them.
I see.
So this is the challenge we are facing.
So you MPP, NDC, you have a pink sheet copy. NDC had a pink sheet copy, which were having the same details in the central situation.
Yes.
But the Electoral Commission,
a pink sheet that had different altogether. So the ones that we are going to accept these ones. That's why you had shortfalls in some of the areas.
I see.
And then we said clearly, look, even granted, if those ones were added, our candidate was still winning. It was not on the same basis Madam Jean Mensah declared His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. Out of the 276, they could gather only 267. Is that not true? It left with 9. They didn't add the 9. But they came out with a very beautiful analogy. Of course, if you add all the 9 constituencies to Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, he was not still going to. So clearly, Dominic Abinya, they said 3 pink sheets. Those 3 pink sheets, they know the problem with those 3 pink sheets. When the issues happened, they couldn't trace them. They are now trying to use scan copy. And we say, well, accept scan copy. The law doesn't allow that. Bring scan copies.
The scan copies of
of the pink sheets that was vandalized. Otherwise, everybody will sit in his room and scan pink sheets and bring it and say, these are original scan copies.
So I see. So the declaration of Dom Pamina was done without the 3 polling stations.
3 polling stations. That's what they are talking of. And clearly, even if they added, our candidate was still beating them with a wide margin.
We're back shortly after this quick break. We'll round this matter up. Stay with us.
under what circumstance can an election result be rendered null and void or illegal, for that matter, what the Electoral Commission is doing right now?
Well, so let's take it from the point of the EC itself and what they've been telling us. The reason for which they say some of the seats are invalid or that they do not follow due procedure. The EC tells us, for instance, that some of their declarations were made under duress, that some of their officers were intimidated, some of them were coerced to do things that ordinarily they wouldn't do. But when you look at our law, especially when you look at the representation of the people's law, PNDC law 284, you would find that there's a method for questioning every election.
I see.
Now that method, and if you permit me, that the validity of an election to Parliament may be questioned only by a petition brought under this part. Every election petition shall be presented before the High Court.
The High Court?
Yes. And this, you can find this in Article 99(1), where they talk about the High Court having jurisdiction as to the validity of an election of a member of Parliament. Now, under what grounds will the court annul an election? Let me show you that briefly. And it includes things like the intimidation that the EC is talking about, and where there's bribery and all those things.
Right.
So generally, the view is that where the election, the allegation is that the election was characterized by so much intimidation, bribery, to the extent that it can affect the outcome of the election, then it is good grounds for the court to intervene.
I see. That's for the courts?
Yes, for the High Court
Electoral Commission
to intervene. And it's quite curious that the EC, in all their public pronouncements, have not been able to tell us under what law, because that would have settled everything.
That they are doing this.
The only reference they keep making to us is the Regulation 43 of the CI 127, which rather tells us what the procedure is. And in fact, when you look at the law that we are discussing now, it also says that where there's an allegation that the election has not been conducted in conformity with the law or the regulation that guides the election, it is grounds for the High Court to make an order.
I see.
So these things that the EC is speaking about clearly are things that the law makes provisions for and puts them before the High Court for contention. But the contention now on the other side is that because the election is not yet over, and their argument is that the election is only over when the results have been gazetted, and then we take it from there. But the argument, those on the side of the MPP, for instance, are making, like we heard Haruna Mohammed say, is the fact that there had to be a gazette of the results for there to be somebody, NP-elect, properly so-called, before that contest can be done.
Right.
But when you look at the PNDC law 284, it appears to be saying something else. So matters of intimidation, matters of bribery and corruption, especially matters of non-compliance with procedure or the CI are all things that the High Court can look into and give a relief.
Good stuff there, Dennis. So while we round up, Dr. Asitanko, so essentially whatever the Electoral Commission is basing on to ask for a recollation, which you say it's not even provided in law, it can only be granted by the High Court.
Very well, that is it. That is what the law says. And we are very clear in our mind that we are advised by our lawyers that, look, whatever they are doing is illegal, completely illegal. It doesn't lie in the mouth of the commissioners to determine that the declarations were made by the returning office did not follow procedure. That is not their power. They don't have that power. And it's very clear. Their power only comes under Regulation 43(2), where their duty, they are just like conveyor belt. Theirs is to receive the writ, the 1B, and go and gazette it and inform clerk. That is all. They don't have any business interfering in that, how the election collation is done for the parliamentary election. But this is not presidential. This is parliamentary. She is a returning officer for presidential, and she should concentrate herself on that and leave the parliamentary business. She has no business in that.
But you're in court with the Electoral Commission tomorrow?
Yes, very well. We are in court, and we'll be there. They have their lawyer. They were safe. So why is it that in her press conference she didn't talk about the legal tussle that we have with them over it? She was quiet. She knew the reason behind that.
So the case will be heard tomorrow?
Yeah, our motion will be moved tomorrow, and we are very sure that the judge will do justice to Rich, because we can't allow this. If we allow this, we are setting precedent. Where next time you make a declaration, we also go and say that declaration was done under duress. It didn't follow due process. And therefore, they should come back and we'll do recollection. And that is the time you begin to see illegal pink sheets being thrown around left and right. That is what they are trying to do, so that we will introduce illegal fake pink sheets and bring it there to do the recollection and declare their favorite as winners. Because, you know, the pink sheet doesn't go into the ballot box. Are you aware of that? And so all the sealed materials in the ballot box doesn't include the pink sheet. Somebody is holding them. The returning officer and other people, they are holding the pink sheets. So when you say they should bring it for recollection, and they go and bring new ones, fresh ones, like what we saw at the Okaikui Central, and then in Sawam Adoji, fake ones were brought, ostensibly saying that they were original ones. Meanwhile, they were not original. They were fake ones. We identified them. So this recollection they are going to do, when we allow it, they will go and introduce new pink sheets, fake ones, in order to overturn the declarations that they have, like what they did in Fantuakwa North, at Tesano. That was an illegal declaration. A returning officer declared our candidate winner. These people brought another joker to declare them as winners.
That was a deputy returning officer, assistant returning
officer.
There
is no deputy returning officer. Look, there is no deputy returning officer in this year. They say an assistant. An assistant is different from a deputy.
Well, I said an assistant.
His assistant doesn't mean there is a deputy. So he describes himself as a deputy. The law doesn't define any deputy here. The law says a returning officer. And then you can appoint an assistant to assist him, but not a deputy returning officer. There is no law. You see, we must operate within the legal framework.
Dr. Rashid Tanko Computer, thank you very much for coming. And we'll keep an eye on what happens tomorrow.
I'm grateful.
We will be in court.
Very well.
To see what happens. But thank you so much for staying with us here on Ghana Tonight. On behalf of the rest of the team, we do appreciate your company. And I'm reminding you, we're going to be there on the 28th of December for the 3FM All-White Party. A number of you have called already. Keep calling, because just a few more tables. I want to share a table with you. Call this number, 053 1100 053 1100 or 053 053 My name is Alfredo Conce. Do have a good night.
Ghana Tonight is brought to you by
Flamingo Paint. Superior durability, superior hiding, superior coverage, simply superior.